Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America. Thank you for being with us on the program today. The trilogy Whisper in My Ear has been called by one reviewer the best series I've ever read. It brings history to life, and you don't want to put it down. From acclaimed author John Henry Hardy, it's the 1960s and cultural and political unrest sweeping across America. In the midst of this turmoil, three young Americans find themselves on a path that sends them to join the war effort in Vietnam. Now, he was inspired to write Whisper in My Ear after observing the mistreatment of America's soldiers returning home from the Vietnam War. John is a Marine Corps veteran, more than 33 years, first as an artilleryman, then a military policeman. As a public affairs officer, he wrote numerous newspaper and magazine articles, several winning Freedom's Foundation awards. Recalled to active duty in 1994, served until he was forced to retire because of age. A bachelor's degree in psychology from Rutgers, a master's in business management from the University of Phoenix. John is a retired AT&T territorial support manager, also the author of The Place Where the Giant Fell, When Brothers Meet, The Day God Played Baseball, and The Legend of the Phantom Effect. John Henry Hardy, author of the trilogy Whisper in My Ear, with us on This Week in America. John, welcome back to the program. Great to have you with us once again.
Oh, thank you, Rick, and thank you for having me on again. It's always a pleasure to hear you and to get the review to the books. And each time we do it, it feels a little bit better.
Well, it's the books are so exciting. You're a great storyteller, both verbally and in the written word. And the books are all available right now. You'll find them at John's website, jhhardy.com. You can link onto that by going to our website. The past interviews, and we've talked about all the books that John has written, you will find at his website and our website as well, the videos tab at thisweekinamerica.us. We've talked about Whisper in My Ear, Volume 1. We're going to talk about Volumes 2 and 3 today. This really is a meaningful trilogy that you wrote, isn't it, for yourself? This is a powerful story that you felt needed to be told.
Absolutely, Rick. As I said when we reviewed volume number 1, I hated the way that the soldiers and the women, too, were treated on their way back from Vietnam while the war was still raging, and even after the war was over. And I was determined that someday I'm going to sit down and write something on it, try to make it interesting so people don't view it just as a history book, but they also view it as they can also get the facts of the war from the perception of the people who served there. And I also wanted to know something about the Vietnamese culture and what was happening there and how different it is today over there. They've modernized considerably as compared to when the war was going on.
It's a different look at the Vietnam War and the people who fought in it. It's Whisper in My Ear. We've talked about Volume 1, that video and audio available at our website, John's as well. Let's pick it up with Volume 2, and so glad at the end of Volume 1 that this was going to be a trilogy, so we didn't have to leave the growth of these characters. There was a story that continued. Talk about Volume 2. Where does it pick up?
Volume 2 picks up when the main characters, Dion Murphy, Kathy Addison, Norman Connington, and Barbara Mandera are now in Vietnam. And Norman is in the F-4 Phantom because the Viet Cong are shelling the airfield at Da Nang and also trying to hit the hospital where the love of his life, Barbara Mandera, is. And so Norman is really ticked about this because they're trying to kill her, trying to kill the wounded in the hospital. And he gets up in his Phantom with the Rio, which is the radar intercept officer, Dan Carruthers, and they go through hell's fire to get up to the air. The plane is hit many, many times, but it's a good aircraft. The F-4 Phantom was the main American fighter plane used throughout the Vietnam War. He gets out of the barrage that he's being hit with, and unfortunately, Dan Carruthers gets hit, and he's unconscious. So now Norman doesn't have a Rio. He's by himself. And he doesn't have communications with his home base, so he has to gauge everything by his own visual judgment. He sees the artillery pieces firing, and he zooms in towards them. The commander of the Viet Cong there is a man who wants to make general. He's a colonel, and he could have pulled away after hitting the airfield, but he decides he's going to be a big hero in the North, and he's going to hit the hospital and stay longer than he was supposed to. Unfortunately, when he did that, Norman comes down and he sees the artillery fire and he unleashes a torrent of napalm. The napalm hits the ground, bounces, and it explodes into a huge ball of fire. And these people who are on these guns, all of a sudden they're trapped. The nighttime that was their friend before is now their mortal enemy, because they can't get the artillery pieces back inside the mountain where they came from, and the napalm makes it impossible for them to run. They're covered with this jelly gasoline. They're on fire. The commander sees his command is burning. The artillery pieces are burning with the gasoline that's stuck to them. The tires blow out. Pieces of hot rubber hit his men. He eventually dies too. He dies from the napalm wounds. And Norman, now that the fight is over, he goes in over the airfield and he drops the two 500-pound bombs on the people who have escaped the torment. And the 200-pound bombs, of course, blows everybody to smithereens. And the Marines in the fighting holes that are around the perimeter of the airfield, they feel the stuff coming down on them, and they realize that it's blood, bone tissue from the people who were murdered, or who were not murdered, but who were killed in the bomb attack.
Yes.
And they put ponchos over their heads because they don't want this stuff falling down on top of them. Well, anyway, Norman lands in the airfield. The plane is a wreck. He just barely gets to the ground. And lo and behold, he's on the ground. He runs around to see how Dan Carruthers, the Rio, is. He's unconscious. And Norman's worried that the snipers are going to be around to shoot him. But because of they were devastated on the battlefield, nobody's there. Crash crew comes and takes him and the Rio to the hospital. Norman doesn't realize he's wounded, but he is. They're taken to the hospital. He's now in a place that he hates to be. He's kind of soft. He's nauseated by people who are ill and people who are wounded, but he has to go because he's wounded too. Only slightly, but he's wounded. Inside the hospital, Kathy Addison is working there, and her best friend Barbara Mandera, who we met in the first volume, is also there, and her husband has been looking for her for years, and he finally finds her in Vietnam. And he is going to kill her. He's going to get even with her for leaving him. He's a maniac. He's killed before, but this happens in life. And so he goes into the hospital, and he's looking for Barbara Mandera, and he can't find her. She's not on duty that night. In fact, after Norman got out of the hospital, he has taken her back to Boston with him to meet his family, so he has no chance of catching her. So he's going to do the next best thing. He's going to get her best friend, Kathy Addison. Kathy's working in triage where her boyfriend Dion has been wounded, and he's in the hospital. She's taking care of him. And there's a wounded Vietnamese boy in there. He looks like he's 15 or 16 years old, but he's not. And he sees the chance to kill Kathy. Even though they've treated him for wounds, he tries to kill Kathy. And she turns around and sees him, and she screams. And out of the bed comes a sick Dion Murphy comes out of the bed. He struggles with this kid and he kills him. And so, but the kid has managed to stab him in the chest with a scissors, so he's got to go to the main hospital for surgery. In the meantime, Kathy's walking back by herself because of this incident. She has nobody to walk back with her to the pickup area. And lo and behold, this psychopath, Race Law, sees her and recognizes her, and he kidnaps her and pulls her into the tent, ties her up, gags her, and terribly sexually assaults her. He also sodomizes her and causes injury to her body. And he wants to kill her. He's on the verge of killing her when he sees headlights on the tent where he's got her. And it's the nurses returning looking for their lost camera, which is Kathy. So he runs out of the tent, the coward that he is, and disappears into the night. A search party finds Kathy, takes her to the hospital, and she's there for a day or two when she wants to go home. She's been sexually assaulted. She has wounds of her own, and this is basically what could happen to nurses who were in Vietnam. Not only were they had the Viet Cong to fear, but they also had the own American soldiers to fear too, because there was thousands and thousands of soldiers are there, and not that many women who they call round eyes. There's many thousands of Vietnamese girls, but the GI still long for a round-eyed woman, a white woman from the United States.
Right.
and there's very few of them in Vietnam, and so they have to be protected from the Americans as well as the Viet Cong. And so, you know, one of my pet peeves has always been that women haven't always been recognized for everything that they do, particularly women in the military. And I would like to read a small passage from the book that defines what happened to women like Kathy Addison.
Yes, please
Now,
do.
she's been assaulted, she's wounded, and the thing about it is that the men who are wounded, have scars that are always going to be visible. If they've lost a leg, if they've lost an eye or an arm, it's always going to be recognizable. But the wounds that Kathy has are not going to be one. And I want to read a small passage. And this is rightly so. The soldiers receive a lot of the recognition because they're in the combat units.
Yes.
And I like to quote this short passage. It says, "The warriors would receive service medals and combat awards, including the Purple Heart, for giving their very best and suffering from wounds and emotional trauma inflicted by a foreign enemy. But their nurse has been wounded by a domestic enemy, which is that crazy man, Ray Slaw. Therefore, she was not eligible to receive any combat awards, even though she too has given her very best to those entrusted to her care and was suffering from the same kind of pain and emotional trauma as those who have given their very best on the field of battle." To the credit of the American Army, and toward the end of the war, women began getting a little bit more organized. And there was 4 nurses in Vietnam, in Saigon, who were wounded by enemy fire. But their names are Lieutenant Ruth Mason, Lieutenant Frances Crompton, Lieutenant Barbara Wooster, and Lieutenant Junior Grade Darby Reynolds. And for their wounds, they all received Purple Hearts. Kind of where they're emerging into the limelight a little bit, where the support people have always been in the dark, because the combat units are the ones that the people are interested in seeing, where the action and the fighting is going on. So things have improved slightly for the people. Unfortunately, Dion Murphy, when he got out of the hospital, he tracks down this Ray Slaw because he knows what he did to Kathy. He tries to place him under arrest, but of course this guy resists him. And he pulls out a knife and he tries to stab Dion with the knife. And he knows he's not going to win a hand-to-hand combat with Dion. So he takes the knife, he throws it at him, and he runs into a back bedroom where he's got a pistol. Unfortunately for him, Dion is a linebacker. And he's still very strong. And even though he's been wounded, he still has a lot of strength. He chases this man into the bedroom. And just as the man reaches the gun, Ray Slaw tries to bring the gun around to shoot him. This linebacker hits him with everything he's got, and he injures the guy's back immediately. And the guy's laying on the bed holding the gun now, and he's trying to get it around to shoot Dion, and he's pulling the trigger, but he can't hit him. So Dion takes the gun away from him, puts his arm up behind him, and because he won't surrender, Dion, and he's pissed at him anyway, snaps his neck and kills him. Now, he's laying on the bunk. What does Dion do? He has to call the military police, tell them what happened. Lo and behold, for some reason, Kathy Addison got out of the hospital, and she's on her way home, but she has to wait till the next day. She doesn't want to go back to the barracks because the women are going to say, "Oh, we're so sorry what happened to you," and they're going to make it all over again. She doesn't want to hear any of that. So instead of going right back to the barracks, she's going to go out for a walk until it gets dark, and then she's going to come back and get to the barracks, get in her bed, and leave early in the morning. Well, she discovers this barracks, and she sees that it's brand new, and she says, "I think I'll spend a couple of hours in there and wait till it gets dark." When she goes in there, Ray Slaw is on the bunk now, and Dion has heard her come in, thinking that she's an accomplice of this guy, Ray Slaw. And Kathy had taken the pistol that had been given to Dion when he was in the hospital because he could be court-martialed for it. And she's taken the pistol after she got out of the hospital, hides it in her smock, and she's going to get rid of the gun. When she goes in and she sees Ray Slaw laying on the bunk, she thinks he's sleeping. And she takes out the gun and she puts 4 slugs into him. In the meantime, Dion's hiding in the closet and has the pistol that that Ray Slaw had, and he's shocked to see Kathy. And she immediately leaves. She's upset, but she leaves. So now Dean's got a real problem. I mean, Kathy came in and put a bullet into this guy. It's going to be in the newspapers all over the United States when they find out. And he doesn't want that to happen to her. He doesn't want anybody to know that she's been sexually assaulted. The whole world doesn't have to know that. And so he lets her go, and he gets another Marine to help him dispose of the body. Problem is, fishermen find it, turn the body into the Americans, and they know who it is. It's Ray Slaw. And they know that he's wanted for sexually assaulting Kathy. And he also knows that she has a boyfriend named Dion Murphy. And consequently, they're charged with murder, and they're court-martialed. During the court-martial, one of the Marines that has helped Dion dispose of the body shows up. He shows up as a witness for the defense. And of course, the prosecutor, whose name is Captain Beamish, he wants to be the Judge Advocate General of the Marine Corps. So he wants these people prosecuted and convicted of murder. And he doesn't tell them about the money that Ray Slaw stole and was hoarding. But Dion found it when he found this man in the barracks. But he didn't take any of the money. He just left it there. He knows that the CID is going to come, the Criminal Investigation Division. They're going to find the money and they'll return the money where it rightfully belongs because it belongs to the American people. The American people gave that money to help service the people who were fighting over in Vietnam, and Dion won't have anything to do with it. And in the end, when he's court-martialed, him and Kathy are court-martialed, the officer or the sergeant who helped him dispose of the body testifies on his behalf, and he brings up the subject of the money. And the defense is saying, what money? We haven't heard of any money, which the prosecutor fails to mention. He doesn't mention the money because he knows that this is going to be a big deal for the defense. So when this sergeant testifies for Kathy and for Dion, the defense lawyer asks him, did Dion Murphy ever tell you that he killed Ray Slaw? And the sergeant says, yes, he did. So he says, why did he kill him? And he says, he told me he did it in self-defense. And the defense says to him, when you were in there disposing of the body, was there a lot of blood around? Was this man mutilated or anything? And he says, no. He says, and so the people who are on the panel or the jury, as it's known in the civilian world,
Yes,
are listening to this. And they're saying, here's a guy that's a Marine. He doesn't steal the money. He could have taken the money and hid it away and kept it for himself, and nobody would have known it. And then he could have just left the body there, and everybody would have thought that the Viet Cong got into the base and murdered this guy, and he took his money. But because he didn't do that, the jury exonerates him. They exonerates him from murder, and they exonerates Kathy from being an accomplice to murder, because now they realize she really did shoot a person, and she thought he was alive, but she was mentally stressed at the time. And there is a provision in the Uniform Code of Military Justice that a person who is under severe mental and medical strain can plead self-defense because they were not mentally responsible at the time, and that's what the jury does.
You know, it's such a fascinating story. Just going to stop for a second here so people are listening. We're talking about Whisper in My Ear, volumes 2 and 3, about halfway through the program here today. John Henry Hardy, our guest. You can get information on the books and order the books at his website, jhhardy.com. Or go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and get information. John, didn't mean to interrupt, just wanted to let people know what the book we're talking about, and more importantly, where they can find the book and read the story for themselves. So back, we're talking about volumes 2 and 3 of Whisper in My Ear. Pick it up.
Okay, now we're going to go into volume 3. Norman, who has been on the airfield, is in combat. He's in the air again. He's flying. He's back from his convalescent leave. And there's another fighter ace on the other side of the story who is a communist. He's a Chinese pilot who's flying for the North Vietnamese, which the Chinese think the Americans don't know about, that they know Chinese pilots flew a lot of their aircraft. And he's going to go down to another location, and the Marines are rebuilding the airfield there, and they're going to get caught out in the open. The pilots from the North Vietnamese aircraft rarely go into South Vietnam. They try to stay into North Vietnam in case they get shot down. They won't become prisoners of war, and the Americans won't know that the Chinese are flying the planes for them. So as Norman's over this North Vietnam defending the airfield again, this pilot decides he's going to pull a game of chicken with him. He's pulled it with other Americans before, and he's going to do it with Norman. Unbeknownst to him, Norman isn't going to chicken out. But what happens, what Norman has in the F-4 Phantom, which is a marvelous aircraft, he has a warning system in there. And when two aircraft lock on against each other, and they're at such an altitude where the air is really, really thin, the controls of the aircraft don't react very quickly. It takes a longer time. When Norman hears this warning in his ears, in his headset, he bails out, and the co-pilot bails out with him. But now the guy that's in the MiG that's coming at them, it's too late for him to bail out, and the two planes collide in the air, and of course they crash into the ground, and the Chinese pilot is killed. Unfortunately, for the new Rio in the back seat, his name is Bobby Bird. His parachute didn't open, and he catapults to the ground. Of course, he's dead. Norman's parachute opens, and he lands in the tree, and he gets untangled, and he goes looking for his partner, and he sees this whole group of civilians coming towards him, and they've got an ox dragging something on the ground, and it's how you should water buffalo, and he knows they're coming for him. Luckily for Norman, there's two Air Force pilots in the air, and they know what happened. They called headquarters, found out that Norman's been shot down, and they know about where he's at, and they came in and they swooped down against these civilians and this militia from a village that are going after Norman. And they spray the field with fire, kill a lot of the soldiers. They fire back with their rifles, but they're nothing, just like a pea shooter against an F-4 Phantom. And Norman gets a chance to escape. Unfortunately, a sniper named Nu Jin, who we introduced in volume number 1, is an excellent tracker. He's going home on leave, and he finds out from the commander up north that there's an American pilot and they can't catch him. He's evading capture. So Nu Jin's going on leave. He's ticked off now because now he has to track this guy, and he's not going to get his full leave. So he tracks him to a village, and eventually he tracks Norman down. And Norman gets lost in the dark and goes the wrong direction. Instead of going toward the Ben Ha River, he's going east. And this sniper, Nu Jin, tacks him down, and he hits him over the head with a rifle butt. He's now a prisoner of war. When Norman awakes, he's in a cart, and his hands are tied in front of him to a post. And he opens up his eyes, and he can see that there's a man sitting on the seat in front of him between the bars, and that there's a water buffalo pulling the cart. But what he doesn't know is standing behind him is several Viet Cong soldiers, and one of them is Nu Jin, this guy that's out to get even with him. So he starts to move, and of course they know that he's awake now. And so now they're going to start to torture him even more. Nu Jin grabs him by his hair. He's got a scalp wound from the rifle butt, and he pulls him by his hair, and he's making him suffer. And the Americans didn't do that to the prisoners that they had. You know, they just took them prisoner or turned them over to the South Vietnamese. So unfortunately, they're going to take him up to the Hoa Lo. And after several days of travel in the cart, they put him on foot. They tie him, hands in front of him. They tie him to one guard in front of him and the guard in back of him so he can't escape. And they start taking him over to the prison that's known as the Hanoi Hilton. It takes several weeks to do this. And they sleep in bomb craters. They feed him very little. He's hungry. His scalp wound is getting infected. And they finally come to a village. And Norman realizes that they're taking him to one of the Viet Cong field hospitals. And the field hospitals in the Viet Cong are very, very much more primitive than the American field hospital. They don't have a lot of supplies. The wounded, of their own wounded that they have in the hospitals, are suffering badly because they don't have very much laudanum. A lot of the medical supplies that they do have been pilfered from American depots and taken north to the Viet Cong to pay tribute to the Viet Cong so they won't kill the people's families who own businesses. So they're with the Viet Cong. They're paying tribute to the Viet Cong. They're paying tribute to the South Vietnamese. And of course, neither one of them know it. They get Norman to a hospital. He meets a woman there who seems to be very friendly towards him. He reminds him of Barbara Mandera, the woman he loves. And while she looks at his wound, she gets somebody to shave his head, and she comes back. She's a nurse in training, and she sutures his skull. The wound he's got in his skull, cleans it out. It's got maggots in it. They clean it out of his hair. The maggots kept his wound clean because they only eat the dead flesh. So she sews his scalp shut, and he sees when she's bending over him that she's wearing a silver cross. And he thought, oh my God, this person's a Christian. So he trusts her. And he confides in her. But she has done this before with other prisoners, and that she's a Christian and that she's, that she believes in Jesus Christ and God and all that stuff. So she betrays Norman. They find out that Norman is not from the base that they want to capture because it anchors the western part of the American defensive lines. He's not from there, so they have no use for him. And they send him on to the Ho Lo. He gets to Ho Lo, and lo and behold, it's the worst trap that he's ever been in. They blindfold him before they take him in, but he can hear these metal doors opening and closing. He knows he's going into a prison, and he thinks it's probably Ho Lo, the one the Americans call the Hanoi Hilton, and he's being interrogated. And the interrogator is an officer whose brother has been killed in the war by Americans. So he has no love or compassion for Americans. And his jailers, one who he calls the giant, and the other one who he calls the midget, one is huge and one is small, they are actually masochistic. They, sadistic. They beat him, they torture him, even on the way dragging him from the prison cell to his place where he's being interrogated. Over a period of weeks, this man puts a gun to his head and he pulls the trigger, teasing him, taunting him, making him think he's going to die. And of course, Norman's scared to death. But he still won't tell them a lot of what they want to know. He knows a lot of the layout of the airfield where they want to go, and he won't tell them. And so they keep torturing him. They take him into a chamber where they tie his hands behind his back. And then they tie a rope between his hands, and they put it through a loop in the ceiling, and they pull him up, and he's hanging there by his hands behind his back. Wow. Yeah, and these are actually true events of people who suffered at Ho Lo. And so I incorporated him into the story. They got him off of the ground. He's barely on his tiptoes now, and they take his hands, and they push him up behind his back, and they dislocate his shoulders. And he's really in pain now. And this happens over a period of time. They take him back when he's semi-conscious, dump him back into his cell. They keep him separated from the other prisoners, so he doesn't even know who's in Ho Lo. Well, after several weeks of this, finally one day, they come into his cell. They drag him out of his cell by his hands. He's dreading going back to see this person that's tormenting him, and they tie him into this chair. When he's in the prison cell, he manages to get his arms back into sockets, but it doesn't make any difference anymore. They tie his hands behind his back. They tie his feet to the chair. And now, his tormentors, these sadists, before the interrogator is going to get in, they're going to soften him up a little bit more, and they start to choke him. And Norman can't breathe. He's struggling in the chair, and he's to the point of passing out, and they let him go. They do him to this several times. Finally, the interrogator comes back in, and Norman hears himself talking. He doesn't even recognize his own voice. And so now he's ready to sign anything, and he signs these papers for these people, and saying that the Americans are killers and so on and so forth. And so he goes back to his cell, and he's really physically drained and mentally drained too. The only thing that keeps him going is his love for this woman, Barbara, the woman that he fell in love with, the first woman he ever loved in his life. And the words that a priest spoke to him before he was captured and told him that someday you're going to find God. Norman didn't believe in God. His mother never took him to church. His family didn't practice any particular religion. So he doesn't know God. But in his prison cell, he finds out that's the only thing that he really has to see him through the hardest of times. They broke him. He gave them the information that they wanted to know. And so he's laying in his cell, dreaming of Barbara, cries himself to sleep at nighttime, because when he found out something from Barbara's past, he really hurt her feelings, and he hurt her, and he's sorry that he did it. And he went to see that priest, and that's where he found out about God, and told him that Barbara Madeira, what happened to her, wasn't her fault. She grew up in a country they were prisoners of the Japanese. A lot of the women, of course, in the Philippines were raped by the Japanese during World War II, including her mother and a lot of her friends. And so, what happened to her wasn't her fault. So now he's in his cell. She's way back in South Vietnam. He's a prisoner of war, and he's sorry for what he did, but he can't tell her. And so finally, one day they come in and they take him and they put him in with other prisoners. And he just can't believe, that there's other Americans here. They help him with his wounds. They have a little bit extra food to give him, not very much, but more than he was getting. And he has boils all over his back from laying for weeks and weeks on his back with soil. And they help squeeze the boils out of his back. And, and they get him, and he finally starts to talk to him. He said, they broke me. And the other prisoner says, don't worry, Norman, they broke all of us. And there's an officer there, and his name is Bud Day. He's a colonel in the Air Force, and he wisely gets these other prisoners to memorize everybody's name that they can. And so they know when the war is over, if they're still alive, they know who was murdered in the prison camps and who wasn't, because they'll know who was there alive. And so this is a great thing that he does. Eventually, Norman gets back to being partially normal, and he finds out that all these prisoners are all love-starved. I mean, they haven't seen some of these guys at 4 and 5 years. They haven't seen a round-eyed woman. They don't care if it's a Vietnamese woman. They would just love to see a woman. And one day, this one prisoner is in his cell, and this young girl, a pretty girl, comes running across the street, and she has to pee. But he's looking out the crack of his prison cell, and he can see her. And, it's the talk of the prison system for months on end. They do it with the tap code. They can't believe this guy was so lucky to see a bare naked woman, or almost a bare naked woman. And it's one of the things that lifts their morale. So finally, one day, all of a sudden, the torture stops, because they're used to getting people dragged out of their cells, taken down to the interrogator. And even though they've got a lot of information from them already, they're still treating them horribly. And all of a sudden, one day, it just stops, and nobody can understand why. And one day they come and they grab Norman, they pull him out of the cell. He thinks, oh, I'm going to the blue room, which was the torture room that everybody called it the blue room. And instead of taking him to the blue room, they take him to this little spigot. It's got water coming out of the wall. And there's a little piece of soap on the ground. And Norman can't believe it. The guy's giving him a chance to wash with a bar of soap that he hasn't seen in months. So he realizes that a lot of other prisoners of war are going to have to use that little piece of soap. So he's very, very careful not to get the soap too wet, but he gets some, and he rinses out his uniform, which hasn't been rinsed out in months or thing. So the treatment is getting a little bit better. And the prisoners somehow find out that there's negotiations going on to release the prisoners. And so it boosts a lot of their morale. And so one day they come in and they start separating people out. And they realize that, hey, maybe this exchange of prisoner of wars is really true. And so, lo and behold, it is. And they start taking better care of the prisoners. They give them cleaner uniforms to wear than the slop that they've been wearing for months and months at a time. And all of a sudden, they're in this big room, and there's an American officer there with other American officers. And they realize they're being exchanged. It's a prisoner of war exchange. Richard Nixon is president of the United States now. He's negotiated a Vietnamization of the war, where the Americans are going to pull out, and the South Vietnamese are going to have to fight on their own. They're well trained. They got American equipment. And so, lo and behold, the prisoner exchange happens. And it's nationally televised in the United States. And Kathy Addison, who's sitting at home with her parents, her dad and her are watching the prisoner of war exchange. And she said, hey, That's Norman Coddington. And they thought his mother and father thought he was dead. And so her father says, "Are you sure?" She said, "Yeah, that's him. I would know him anywhere." So her father gets on the phone and calls Norman's father, who is a lawyer and all that stuff. He's given up his son for dead. He hasn't heard from him for years. And he picks up the phone and he says, "I got some good news for you." And Norman Coddington's father says, I don't listen to the news anymore." He said, I don't want to watch anything. My son, I'm sure he's dead or he's somewhere he'll never be home." And he said, "No, your son's alive." And the father starts, "No, no, this is too good to be true." And finally, Kathy's father yells at him, "God damn it, turn on the TV set." And so, he never got mad at him before. So he turns on the TV set and he sees the prisoners of war, but he doesn't see his son. And then he's saying, I knew it, my son's not there. And the other guy still on the phone with him says, "He's there, just watch the telecast." And lo and behold, there's his son. And oh my God, he breaks down, he's crying, and he's, his wife, which was Norman's mother, died several years before of colon cancer. So he has nobody to talk to or to share that with her. However, he has married one of the persons that worked for him for many, many years. And so he calls her, and they're so happy that he's still alive. He's coming home. Norman gets home. When he gets to the prisoner of war exchange unit, they have a couple of days that they have to wait. And Norman, of course, he wants to find Barbara Mandera. So he gets somebody to go on leave with him, gets him to the airport, goes down to where Barbara Mandera was last seen in South Vietnam. And lo and behold, she's not there. She's gone home, and she's living in the Philippines now. So lo and behold, the prisoners of war go to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. It's a stopover on the way to the United States. So Norman disobeys the command to stay on base, and he goes off and he races looking for Barbara Mandera. Finds out where she's working in the hospital, but he finds out she's married. And she's married to this guy who happens to be in the Filipino mafia. He's into crime, he's into drugs, he's into human trafficking. And there's Barbara, she's married to him.
John, we got a couple of minutes left. I can't wait to see where this goes.
Lo and behold, Norman goes back to the United States. When Barbara Mandera finds he's alive, she leaves her husband. And because she was a nurse in Da Nang Hospital, the Americans accept her as an American citizen because she served in the American military with Americans. She meets up with Norman. They reconcile. They're going to get married. And they're having a huge celebration. Norman's father, who owns and runs a large law firm and has a mansion, sets up a huge wedding reception for him. And they invite Kathy Addison as her maid of honor because they were best friends in Vietnam.
Oh, yes.
They invite her father. They invite the whole family, including Kathy's mother. And at the end, while Kathy and Norman are out in the barn making love because she wants to get pregnant again with somebody else's child, with Dion's child. And so while they're out there, the phone rings, and it's Norman Coddington. And when they come in, there's a note that they're getting married, and Kathy's going to be the maid of honor, and Dion's going to be the best man. And that's how volume 3 ends.
It is just such a, and I can't wait to read it unfold. It's just such a great ending and a great story throughout the trilogy. Whisper in My Ear, as I mentioned, one review says the best series I've ever read. Brings history to life. You don't want to put it down. It's a people's story as well. Volumes 1, 2, and 3 available at John Henry Hardy's website, jhhardy.com. You can link on directly and get there by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. If you missed John talking about all of his other books, you'll find those at his website. You'll find the information on video and audio at our website as well. John, it's been a pleasure having you on talking about all of the books, specifically volumes 2 and 3 of Whisper in My Ear today. A pleasure having you on the program. What an excellent storyteller you are. A great story, brings us a different perspective on what happened in Vietnam. Admirable the way you point out what the women went through and the vital role they played during the Vietnam War. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir, so much for being with us on the program.
Rick, it's always a pleasure, and it's always appreciated being on the program with you. You're a great moderator, and I really appreciate it. And thank you so very much for allowing me to.
Pleasure. And when you come up with a new book, let us know, because we'll come back and we'll talk about that as well. So get back to the computer, write another story, and we'll have you back to talk about that. John Henry Hardy, our guest. jhhardy.com is the website. Talking today about Whisper in My Ear, the trilogy, all 3 volumes available at his website, jhhardy.com. You're listening to This Week in America.